talk a little bit about cohesion today. And when you start taking, there's a couple different ways you can approach this. Whether you're talking about group cohesion or team cohesion, it tends to be the same thing. But, with regards to sports psychology, social psychology, that type of thing. But kind of the important key point of when talking about cohesion is the fact that this is a process that changes all the time. That's what we mean by a dynamic process, and it's something then that's going to be involving lots and lots of individuals in your group. And so as you start thinking, okay, the fact that it is dynamic, and you're having individuals that are trying to stay together in some form or fashion, that's what really helps to influence our understanding of team cohesion. Now the problem is it's not a monolithic concept. So you have two basic types of or I guess two ways of thinking about team cohesion. One is through the task, and the other is through kind of the social connection of the individuals. And they're exactly what they sound like. So the task cohesion is that, maybe people aren't all the time great friends, but they can come together to achieve a goal. Kind of one of the famous examples from the world of sports in the NBA, the Chicago Bulls, Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, both named to the top 50 players of all time list in the NBA. It's very, very, very well documented that these two individuals were not, I don't want to say friends, but these are not individuals that really hung out together off court. They were not in each other's peer group, their circle, that type of thing. Yet they were still able to win multiple championships in the NBA and talk about some of the best NBA teams in pro basketball history. Okay, so again, it's the task, it's the goal that brought people together. And then the whole idea of social cohesion, which is really when you talk about how close people are, and kind of juxtaposing the whole Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen in the NBA example, is if we're sticking in the NBA, LeBron James, and it's sort of reputed that he's through the use of social media and things like that, he's very, very close to members of his team, and he wants to show everyone and kind of demonstrate this through Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is. But both of these two things, oftentimes for a group, whether it's in your sport organization or if you're coaching a team, these individuals don't necessarily have to be best friends. You don't have to have high social cohesion to have strong task cohesion. So as we start moving forward, it's going to be important to try to think about cohesion and trying to increase the cohesiveness of your group is really based upon the understanding of what type of cohesion do you have, and then how do you measure cohesion. There are a couple different ways to do it. First, when you're talking about a direct measurement, basically you sit down and you speak to the people and you say, hey, look, how much do you like being a part of this particular group? How do you think that how well do you think this group functions? Is it dysfunctional? Is it very functional? Oftentimes, the direct approach to measuring, some type of cohesion is to really bring in an outside consultant. You don't want a coach sitting down with the players and saying, hey, look, tell me about my approach, tell me about our approach, because there's not enough social distance for those individuals to really, really be honest. Another way to do it is through the indirect approach, which is where you ask people about some of the same things in terms of how they feel about the climate, the atmosphere, and then you try to really graphically represent everything. And that's what this sociogram is doing. This is born out of what we call network analysis, and a lot of consultants and social scientists and people in governmental agencies use these things, and it's been very, very heavily applied in the world of understanding coaching, especially when you start talking about very, very large groups. So maybe you have something like a football team, maybe an FBS in the NCAA football team. And so you're talking about 80 some odd individuals on scholarship, plus, once you get the athletic trainers and once you get the coaches and the graduate assistants, you're talking about most of the time well over 120 individuals. And so how does the flow of information happen? That's all a sociogram does, is that these consultants come in, or social scientists come in, and they start identifying the key players. And then granted, if you're talking about, if you're using this particular sociogram, for example, maybe this is the offensive team, the defensive team, the assistant coaches and head coach, the athletic personnel in the office, and maybe, if you're talking about the trainers, you're talking about a different manager, you have all these different groups, and then you have individuals within each of these. Okay, and these arrows are just arbitrary. Truthfully, it's just kind of a way of showing how information flows and who talks to whom and how and why and how often and what this gives you. And this happens a lot in college campuses. Is this kind of gives you a graphic representation of how information is digested and flows within a very, very large organization. It's also, one of the things that you'll find is, let's say you don't have, you see there's no arrow, let's say, between this and this. Okay, so if you don't have that, then maybe that speaks to some of the issues within your organization. Another way of kind of thinking about it is, and just trying to kind of parceling out these ideas of cohesion, trying to really understand them, is that you're going to have the group and you're going to have the individual. And it's intuitively, we already know that. Then you're going to have, remember we talked about those different forms of task cohesion and social cohesion? Well, that's in the group orientation. How do individuals feel about other folks on the team? How does when you start looking at the group, how do they relate to what it is the overall goals are going to be? And then when you start looking at the actual individual, and this is going to be a little bit different than the whole idea of social, but it's very, very relatable, is that how do you feel? Do you feel like you're part of a group? Do you feel like you're invested in the goal-setting processes of the actual team? And so what you have is you have this very, very large macro approach and this micro approach down here, and you're trying to really bring all those different things together. And so, by knowing, okay, that you're going to have the individual athlete, you're going to have the group that you have to think about, and then within that, you have different forms of cohesion. So when we talked about bringing a group closer together, it's not that easy. It's because, you're operating on multiple levels here, where you're talking about the very, very small, minute thing, and then you're talking about the very, very big thing. And so how do you bridge that gap? And that's what a leader is supposed to be doing. And so over time, these are just going to be some things that, as a leader, that you need to be aware of. And a lot of these are commonsensical, but think about what's going on with the individuals within your team. Okay, someone has personal history, someone has personal problems. If you have health issues, social issues, whatever. If you're talking about interscholastic or collegiate athletics, then perhaps maybe you have problems in the classroom with individuals and they're not doing well in their GPA and that type of thing. Now start thinking about things that are going to affect the team chemistry, oftentimes. When we talk about leadership factors, that's going to be interesting, because you have a lot of, the ideas of leadership are really starting to change and really evolve over the last 10 years, especially here with the Kansas Leadership Center and kind of some of the ideas that they've been able to propagate, and not just here in the state of Kansas, but in Oklahoma and Iowa and Nebraska. And then one of the things that I know up at the University of Nebraska is that they're using a lot of, they're really trying to do some educational program for student athletes that really focuses on understanding leadership. And leadership, for a lot of people in this new conception, is not something that's done by a position or a role. It's something that every single person within the organization can display. Well, man, that's dramatically different than the way it used to be. In the past, it was like you had the head coach, you had the coaches, or you had your manager and that type of thing. And these were the people in charge because their roles dictated. Well, that's a little bit different. Okay? So now everyone can be a leader. So you have team leaders, you have leaders on the coaching staff, you have leaders in the athletic department, et cetera, et cetera. With regards to environmental factors, it could be something literally like, if we're talking about the actual environment. I'm thinking more about things like maybe you have, when you have Virginia Tech a few years ago, the football team sort of took a very, very large leadership role because the entire campus suffered when you had the person on campus that went around like the gunman that was shooting people and killing people. And so it created a very, very distinct environment. And so that particular team came very close because of that environmental factor, for example. And then finally, the whole idea of communication. Well, what is it? What is communication? It's something we talked a lot about. We will talk more about it. It's because there's a lot of different ways that you can communicate. You can communicate via social media. You can communicate via nonverbal communication. And all this communication, what it really starts to do is it helps you identify a lot of the consequences or some of the group and behavioral outcomes associated with team cohesion. And this is what we really, really absolutely strive for. Is that, let's look here at the individual, is that here at the individual you're looking for not just behavioral outcomes, but also some sort of quantifiable change in performance. Okay? And again, this doesn't mean, success or progress does not necessarily mean success. And so when you're monitoring performance and growth, those types of things, doesn't mean you've met your goal, but it means that you're in the process of evolving, which is usually a good thing. Okay? And so when we start talking about the group, okay, when we talk, how stable is a team? Well, a lot of that depends on the social cohesion of the group. If they're not, if it's a very, very large, say 53-man roster on an NFL team, not everyone's going to be friends. You're talking about a lot of individuals. But if they have strong task cohesion, then quite possibly the stability of the team is going to be very, very high. And as a result, you can tend to track the performance of that particular group. This is what you're looking for, okay? With the group, you're looking for stability. For the individual, you're looking for positive behavior, both on field, off field. And with regards to the group and the individual outcomes, you're really looking for increasing performance and being able to monitor that and move forward. So, in terms of summarizing 50-odd years of research associated with cohesion and that type of thing, instead of listing out all the researchers, I've done this decade by decade by decade, I tried to go, okay, let's go through just a basic flow chart. And this is simply what the research says. This is what we talk about. This is why we utilize it in a sport organization or in a team sports setting. Strong social cohesion, and this is much more with regards to as compared to the task cohesion, but the strong social cohesion, you're playing for individuals, which then is going to hopefully increase the performance. That's it. Very, very simple. And so if you increase the performance, all right, you have all of these different things that a variety of different researchers and schools and models with regards to sports, exercise psychology, and also social psychology have identified. All right. Now I tried to kind of group them together based upon the colors, kind of group them together. So performance, self-efficacy, prediction for future behavior, the whole idea of team cohesion, all of these things are going to be more or less hanging together. All right. We know those things are the result and kind of associated with direct causality. And direct causality is just this whole idea of this, this, and this. We're able to track it. Okay? Now, in terms of the extreme kind of individualistic aspect, these are kind of the personality, moods, the emotion, causal attribution, and then identifying some of those psychological determinants of a particular team-oriented performance environment. All right? So you have the individual psychology, and then you have all of this stuff that's associated with both the individual and the team, all right? And all of this is based on this causality type of process. So you have an antecedent that leads to something else that leads to something else. There we go. That's what we're looking for, okay? And when we kind of expanding the whole causality, remember I was saying that, okay, all these things kind of flow together, so these and this one, all right, they're all going to be kind of in here. And then you have, and you kind of have, you have these sort of little invisible arrows right in here between this, and sometimes, and then kind of in here as well. The team is created by individuals, right? So the individual arrow, or excuse me, the invisible arrow, sorry, language apparently is failing me today, all right, is that the individuals are going to perform better if they feel closer to the team, okay, and vice versa. So the team is a collection of individuals. If the individual buys into it, then their individual performance is going to most likely increase because they're going to have a better impact on the team. Now, what do I mean by individual performance? Sometimes, and not just, because I didn't say individual athletic performance. It's relating to the group. It's investing. It's the emotional input and output that the individual is receiving. Okay, and so their cohesion to the group is going to be much, much higher. Okay, so we know this now, and this has all been much more of a purely sort of athletic environment. How do you do this in terms of the environment that more than likely you all are going to be a part of? Well, the first thing to remember is that there's not an is or an ain't with team cohesion. It's a process that you have to build constantly. And it means that you can regress. It means that you can move forward. And whenever you have a group that's developed, and this kind of comes out of the social psychology, or small groups dynamic research, is that you have a basic process right here for how a group develops, and cohesion is related to this process. Okay, so the group is going to form, and then the storming part is, it kind of comes out of the word brainstorming, but it has to do with how the group in and of itself is sort of starting to settle out. So oftentimes the group is going to be formed not by you. All right, so maybe you have you're hiring people for season ticket sales, and you hire on someone new. All right, that group is now being formed, and it takes a little bit of time to understand who does what their personality is, that type of thing. And through this process of kind of brainstorming and figuring yourself out as a group, you start to develop the basic norms of how people act within the group, how they act within the organizational culture, that type of thing. And then ultimately the group starts to perform and has some sort of measurable output. It's a very, very simple process in terms of trying to graphically represent it or write it out on a PowerPoint slide. But when you're trying to understand team building and cohesion as a process, it's really involved in these things right here, because you're not going to be necessarily involved in the forming of the group, and the performance is what everyone's going to be judged on. So it's the storming and the norming right here. That's where you ultimately have a lot of control over. How do you do that? Oftentimes what's really been a very popular way to do this in intercollegiate athletics especially is you have this whole idea of an intervention approach, which is basically you bring in someone from outside, and that person is going to work with the athletes or the employees and try to develop some skills. And this is usually done through team building activities. All right, so when you have the Mentors in Violence Prevention program that was started at Northeastern University and used by a lot of minor league baseball teams, major league baseball teams, some intercollegiate athletic departments, even some interscholastic athletic departments all over the United States, they bring in people who say, okay, this is what you need to know, this is how you go about doing things. So when we worked with certain community college athletic departments or teams, they bring us in, and this is kind of the direct intervention approach that we are part of. The indirect intervention approach would be that you bring someone like myself in, let's say, and I sit there and I work with the coaches or the employees of the athletic department and try to tell them and show them the rationale, the model, and the theory behind what it is they're doing, and that if they do it this way, then they can expect this type of output. And then those individuals go and start working with the other people in the athletic department or the athletes. One is not better and worse than the other. I mean, there are different pros and cons. All right, in this one, the message tends to be clearer because the person comes from outside, so it doesn't seem as biased. But the impact, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to measure, because how do you have someone that comes in that has legitimacy that a bunch of college athletes, for example, are going to listen to and have that person really change their life in a week or two? Well, the indirect approach, there are a couple things. One, maybe as the teaching process goes on, maybe something's lost in translation. I'm not saying that the coaches and the managers are not intelligent, because they obviously are, but maybe there's not clear communication between the sports psychologists and the coaches, and so that message becomes a little diluted. Also, maybe the athletes would rather hear from the coach, or as we know sometimes, athletes get tired of the messenger, and so the message can be lost because they see this person every single day. So again, pros and cons, it's going to be up to you and your organization, but as you build the team, learning and trying to understand that cohesion is not just a very simple idea of bringing people together, because you have task and social cohesion. You have to think about the group dynamics, and you also have to think about the individual dynamics, and then how this process of direct causation really works together. Once you get all that stuff down, and I know it may seem a little daunting at first, but once you get all those some of those basic processes down, then it really becomes about working with your people and trying to find people outside your organization that can help to maximize the relationship building aspect of what it is that you want to accomplish with your team.